know he was married. Oh my God, he deceived me.
So my husband can do this. I will deal with him badly.
They say the most dangerous secrets are not the ones buried far away in another city. They are the ones sleeping 4 streets from your house, eating the same market tomato you buy, breathing the same neighborhood air, and smiling at you when you pass each other on the road, without either of you knowing what connects you. That was my life, and I did not know it. My name is Fomi Adeyemi. I have been married to George Adeyemi for 9 years. 9 years of waking before the sun to make his breakfast hot and ready. 9 years of ironing his shirts until the collar stood stiff as a soldier's back. 9 years of raising our 2 children, Tolu, who is 7, and little Remy, who just turned 4. In a home I kept clean and full and warm, believing that this man, this husband of mine, was doing the same for us on his end. 9 years of being a good wife. And it all began to collapse on a Thursday evening because of a smell. George worked as a procurement officer for a construction company in town. The job, he always explained, required him to travel to Ibadan every week. Monday morning he would leave, Thursday evening he would return. I had accepted this rhythm like I accepted the rains in August. It was just how our life was arranged. I stopped questioning it somewhere around year 3. But that Thursday, I remember the exact light in the room, that orange evening light that comes through our curtain and falls on the dining table in a long, warm strip. That Thursday when George walked through the front door, dropped his bag by the shoe rack, and opened his arms to hug me. Something inside my body went cold. There was a smell on his neck. Not his cologne, not sweat, not the dust of the road. Something else. Something powdery and warm and deeply feminine. The kind of scent that sits on a woman's skin after she has bathed, rubbed shea butter on her arms, and spent hours pressed against someone she is comfortable with, someone she calls her own. I pulled back from the hug slowly. I looked at his face. George was smiling. That easy, practiced smile he had used on me since the first day we met at a mutual friend's birthday in Lagos. Straight teeth, relaxed eyes, a face that had never once looked guilty in front of me. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Go and shower. Food is almost ready." I went back to the kitchen and I stood over the pot of rice I was stirring and I pressed my free hand flat against the counter to stop it from shaking. Because I knew that smell. I had smelt it before. On his collar 3 weeks ago, on the edge of his sleeve the week before that. I had told myself I was being paranoid. I had told myself I was one of those insecure women who destroyed good marriages with suspicion. I had prayed against the spirit of jealousy. I rebuked the thought. But a woman's nose does not lie. And my nose was telling me something my heart was not yet ready to hear. That night after the children slept and George was snoring beside me, I lay in the dark with my eyes open and I made a quiet, serious decision. I was done asking. I was done doubting myself. I was going to find the truth. I did not know then that the truth was not in Ibadan. The truth had been living 4 streets from my house this whole time, and it was about to walk straight into my life. I started watching George the way you watch a pot you suspect is about to boil, without blinking, without turning away, without making any sound that will let it know you are watching. I noticed he had changed his phone password. I noticed he now showered immediately he entered the house before even sitting down, as if he was washing off evidence before presenting himself to me. I noticed that his Ibadan trips, which used to end on Thursdays, had recently started stretching to Fridays, and when I asked why, he said the company had given him additional responsibilities. More responsibilities? More money? I asked. He laughed and said these things take time. I said nothing. I stored everything. It was my neighbor, Mama Sewa, who broke the first real crack in George's wall, and she did not even know she was doing it. Mama Sewa lived 2 houses from us.
She was the kind of woman who knew everything happening within a 1 kilometer radius and was constitutionally incapable of keeping it to herself. One Saturday morning, I met her at the borehole where we both fetched water, and she was in the middle of what she clearly considered very important news. "You know that new woman in the Alaja compound," she said, lowering her voice to that particular pitch she used when gossip was at its ripest. "The one who moved in almost a year ago with a small baby? Fine woman, long hair. She doesn't talk to anybody, but she's always well dressed." I turned Hannah. "I don't know her. She keeps to herself. But I saw something yesterday that gave me serious pause." Mama Sewa shifted her bucket to her other hand and leaned closer. "I saw a man dropping her in a dark blue Camry. And Fumi, I almost wanted to call you, because that man looked exactly like your George. Same height, same walk. I said to myself, no, it cannot be. But the car even looked the same." The water was overflowing my bucket. I had not noticed. I turned off the tap. I straightened up. I smiled at Mama Sewa the way you smile when you are buying time for your heart to survive what it just heard. "Probably just a look-alike," I said. "You know how these things are." I carried my bucket home. I set it down in the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the bathtub and I pressed both palms over my mouth and I breathed. In, out, in, out. The Alaja compound. I knew that compound. It was a 15-minute walk from our house, just past the fuel station on Adeleke Street. 3 buildings inside a large yard with a rusted green gate. I had passed it 100 times without ever paying attention to who lived inside. That afternoon, while George was watching football and the children were napping, I told him I was going to the pharmacy. I tied my scarf, picked up my purse, and I walked to Adeleke Street. I stood across from the rusted green gate of the Alaja compound and I waited. I waited 20 minutes, 25. Then the gate opened. A woman stepped out with a small child on her hip, heading toward the tap by the roadside. She was tall, slender. Her hair was long and natural, pulled to one side, and she wore a simple blue cotton dress that fit her like she had not tried. The baby on her hip was chubby and bright-eyed, a boy of about 1 year, maybe a little more. She moved with a calm, unhurried ease that told me she felt completely safe in this neighborhood. She turned slightly and I saw her face clearly for the first time. She was beautiful. There was no other word. Not in a loud, obvious way. In the quiet way that makes you look twice and then feel something uncomfortable in your stomach. I turned around and walked home before she could see me. That night, I put Remy and Tolu to bed, and when I came back to the parlor, George was still watching his football and drinking his Maltina, and I stood in the doorway and I looked at this man I had given 9 years to, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger yet, something colder than anger, something that felt like the moment before a storm when the wind stops and everything goes completely still. I went to the kitchen. I began washing the dishes. And I thought about that woman, that baby. That baby looked like it was about 1 year old. 1 year ago, George had told me his company sent him on a 3-month intensive project rotation. He had been largely absent. He had sent money home faithfully. I had been grateful and asked no questions. I dropped the plate I was holding into the sink. It did not break, but something else did. The question was no longer whether George had another woman. The question was how far this had gone and what I was going to do about it. I spent 1 full week doing nothing but gathering information. I was careful, precise, and completely silent about it. George had no idea that the woman he came home to every evening was no longer the woman who believed everything he said. I found out the woman's name through the most ordinary means. I went back to the Alaja compound on a weekday morning when I knew George was at work, and I knocked on the gate. An old caretaker opened it, and I told him I was looking for a friend who had recently moved to the area, a tall woman with long hair and a baby boy. I described her well. He nodded. "You mean Grace? 2nd building, flat B." Grace. Her name was Grace.
I thanked him and left. I did not go inside. I was not ready for that yet. I went home and I sat with that name, Grace. It sat in my mouth like something both ordinary and devastating. Over the next few days, I learned more. Mama Sewa, bless her talkative heart, told me more than she realized. Grace had moved into the Alaja compound 11 months ago. She had come with a baby boy who was only 2 months old at the time. She had no visible job but paid her rent without fail. She drove a car that was registered in someone else's name. She received a male visitor regularly, a tall man in a dark blue Camry who sometimes stayed overnight and sometimes left by evening. By the time Mama Sewa finished talking, my chest felt like someone had filled it with concrete. George had set that woman up in a flat 11 months ago. Their baby was now 13 months old, which meant Grace was pregnant while George was here in this house, sleeping beside me, eating my food, holding my children, telling me he loved me. I did not do nothing rash. I want you to understand this. Every part of me wanted to storm into that compound and tear the whole world apart. But my father, before he died, told me something I have never forgotten. He said, Fumi, never confront a liar with noise. Confront him with evidence. Noise gives him time to adjust. Evidence leaves him nowhere to go. So I kept gathering. I borrowed my cousin BC's old phone, the one she no longer used, and I bought a new SIM. I began tracking George's movement on days he claimed to be in Ibadan by creating reasons to call the office line, not his mobile, the office line. And twice when I called, the receptionist told me Mr. Adeyemi had not traveled that week. He was in town and had been in the office that morning. In town, while I sat at home believing he was in Ibadan. He was in town, visiting Grace, sleeping in that flat, eating a meal cooked in that kitchen, playing with that baby boy, living a whole second life 4 streets away from the life he had sworn before God and our families to honor. On the Friday of that second week, I made my most important move. I went back to the Alaja compound. This time, I went inside. Grace was in front of her flat, spreading small children's clothes on a drying line. She turned when she heard footsteps, and she looked at me with the polite, cautious face of a woman who does not know you, but is too well-mannered to be rude. "Good afternoon," she said. "Good afternoon." I stood there, and I looked at her, and she looked at me, and something passed between us in that moment, something unspoken, a current of mutual recognition that neither of us had words for yet. "I'm sorry to disturb you," I said. "My name is Fumi. I live on Ajayi Street." She nodded slowly. "I came because..." I paused. I had rehearsed this moment 15 times, and now that I was in it, every rehearsed sentence felt wrong, so I said the only true thing I had. "I came because I think we need to talk about a man named George Adeyemi." The clothes peg she was holding dropped from her hand. She stared at me. Her face changed. The polite mask cracked clean open, and what I saw underneath it was something I had not expected. It was not guilt. It was shock, and then rising slowly behind the shock, like smoke behind a door, it was the exact same recognition that was sitting in my own chest. She knew. Or rather, she was beginning to know, right there in front of me, in real time. She picked up her peg from the ground with shaking fingers. She straightened up. She looked at me with eyes that were suddenly very, very careful. "Come inside," she said quietly, and I followed her in. Her flat was small, but neat. A center table with a crocheted covering, a television, children's toys in the corner, a smell of jollof rice and baby powder that hit me in a way I cannot properly explain because it smelled like a home. Not a hideout, not a woman's desperate arrangement, a real functioning home. That detail hurt more than I expected. We sat across from each other at the center table with Grace's baby boy, David, sleeping on a mat behind us, and we talked. It took the first 10 minutes just to establish what was real. Grace spoke carefully, measuring every word, because she did not know yet whether I had come to fight her or to compare notes. And I spoke carefully too, because I needed her to trust me before this conversation could go where it needed to go. I showed her a photograph, George and me at our traditional wedding 9 years ago. George laughing in full agbada with his hand around my waist. She looked at that photo for a long time. Then she got up without a word and went to her bedroom. She came back with her own photograph, George and Grace at what looked like a small private dinner, both of them dressed up, Grace's hand resting on a visibly pregnant belly. George was wearing the same watch in both photographs, his grandfather's watch, the one he never took off. We looked at each other across that table, and the full weight of what we were both living inside settled over the room like a thick fog. "How long?" I asked. "He told me he was a widower," she said. Her voice was completely flat. "He said his wife died in a car accident before he met me. He showed me a death certificate. Fumi, he showed me a death certificate with your name on it." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. He had faked my death. On paper, somewhere, I was dead. He had killed me off and built a new life on my grave while I was alive in a house 4 streets away making his dinner. Grace continued, "He proposed to me. We had a small court wedding 14 months ago. I thought..." She stopped. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright with tears she was refusing to shed. "I thought he was my wife." "You are not his wife," I said. And I heard how brutal it sounded, and I did not take it back because she needed to hear the truth as clearly as I needed to say it. I am his wife. I have been his wife for 9 years, and you have been deceived just as badly as I have been betrayed. We were both quiet for a while. David stirred on his mat and made a small sound in his sleep, and Grace looked at her son with an expression that broke something open in me, because it was the expression of a woman realizing that her child has been born into a lie that she did not choose. "What do you want to do?" she asked me finally. And here is where I want you to understand something important about who I am. A younger version of me would have said, "I want to destroy him. I want to go to his office and his family and his church and make his name mean nothing anywhere he goes." And that younger version of me would not have been wrong to want those things. But I had spent 2 weeks thinking, and I had arrived at something better than destruction. I wanted justice. Structured, documented, irreversible justice. "I want everything he has," I said, "legally, permanently. And I want him to lose everything he thought he was protecting by building this lie." Grace looked at me for a long moment. "Tell me the plan," she said. And so, at that small table with a crochet covering, while George's secret son slept behind us and the afternoon light moved across the walls, 2 women he had betrayed began to build the thing that would end him. We were careful. We were patient, and we were absolutely, ruthlessly thorough. The first thing I did was contact my cousin's husband, Barrister Olusegun Martins, a property and family law attorney who had handled difficult cases for 20 years. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds. And then he said, "Fumi, this man has committed bigamy. That is a criminal offense in this country. But more importantly for you, we can go after the assets." Because here is what George did not know I knew. For the past 3 years, George had been quietly acquiring property. A plot of land in Ipe, a 2-bedroom apartment in Ajah that he rented out, a shop space near the market that had recently appreciated significantly in value. He had kept all of this from me, believing I was too busy running the household to notice financial patterns. But I had noticed. I had a habit, carried from my father's house, of filing away every document that passed through our home. Receipts, agreements, bank statements he left carelessly in jacket pockets. I had a small envelope at the back of my wardrobe that I had been filling for years without fully understanding why.
That envelope became the foundation of our case. Grace, for her part, had the court marriage certificate. She had bank transfer records. Every payment George had ever sent her was traceable to his accounts. She had messages, she had photographs, she had David, whose DNA, when tested, would prove everything that needed to be proven. Barrister Olusegun looked at everything we brought him and said, he has no way out of this. We filed the petition on a Tuesday. The same day George left for what he had told me was another Ibadan trip. He was not in Ibadan, of course, he was in the Alaja compound, which is where the police found him, sitting in Grace's parlor, eating rice, his grandfather's watch on his wrist, his secret son on his lap, when 2 officers knocked on the door with a warrant. I was not there to see his face. I did not need to be. What Barrister Olusegun told me afterward was enough. He said George sat there for nearly a full minute without speaking. Just sat there, with the rice on the table going cold, and his son in his arms, and 2 officers at the door, and his whole elaborate, carefully maintained lie collapsing around him in real time. He was charged with bigamy. The case was not long. He had no credible defense. The fake death certificate he had produced, and we traced where it had been made, a corrupt registry official who was also investigated, only made his position worse. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison, suspended on condition of full financial reparation to both parties and surrender of all concealed assets. The Egbe land, the Aja apartment, the shop space, all of it was divided between Grace and I under the court's directive, with additional maintenance secured for both households, and specifically for David and for Tolu and Remy. Tolu and Remy adjusted. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, especially when the home they return to is honest and stable, even if it is quieter than before. David would grow up knowing his father had failed him, but he would also grow up knowing his mother had refused to break. And George was released after serving a modified sentence. He came to our old street once, I was told, and stood outside the gate of the house that was no longer his, the house the court had transferred into my name, and stood there for a long time before walking away. I was not home that day. I was at a client event, measuring fabric, laughing with a colleague, living the life I had quietly rebuilt from the rubble of his lie. The lesson of this story is not simply that cheating men get punished, though sometimes they do. The lesson is about what happens when a woman stops performing peace she does not feel and starts pursuing truth she deserves. Fumi did not explode. She did not beg. She did not wait for George to confess or change. She gathered herself. She gathered evidence. She found the other woman not as an enemy but as an ally, and she used every legal tool available to her to take back what was hers. And Grace learns the painful version of a lesson many women learn, that love built on someone else's lie is not your fault, but staying in it after you know the truth is a choice only you can make. Both women chose themselves. That is the only revenge worth having. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you have not subscribed yet, subscribe now. More stories like this are coming, and you do not want to miss a single one.